We are all swimming in news about the AI boom, right? But what if it all comes crashing down? In this explainer, we're tackling a really crucial question. What happens if the AI bubble actually bursts? And look, this isn't just a conversation for Silicon Valley. It's a scenario that could ripple out and affect our economy, our jobs, and the future of technology as we know it. So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll jump in a time machine and look back at some of history's biggest tech bubbles. Then, we're going to spot the patterns that show up every single time a bubble bursts. After that, we'll use those lessons to figure out what could happen with the current AI hype. We'll also imagine what AI's next chapter might look like. And finally, we'll get into some real actionable steps we can all think about.
To really get a handle on where we're going, you first have to understand where we've been. And it turns out history has a ton to teach us about tech bubbles. These past hype cycles offer a surprisingly clear blueprint for what we might be seeing with AI right now.
Just take a look at this timeline. You start to see a story that repeats itself over and over. Back in the 1800s, there was railway mania, a total frenzy of investment that, you guessed it, ended in a massive collapse. Then you had the AI winters in the 70s and 90s where all the early excitement just dried up, along with the funding. A lot of us definitely remember the dot-com bubble of 2000 and, of course, the very recent crypto boom and bust. The pattern is just undeniable. A huge surge of hype, sky-high expectations, and then a big dose of reality. But here's the most important takeaway from all of these historical crashes, and you really need to get this. After the railway bubble burst, you know what was left? The tracks, all of them. And they literally changed the world. After the dot-com bust, the thousands of miles of fiber optic cable that were laid in that frenzy, that became the backbone of the internet we use today. The hype dies down, but the core infrastructure, the real building blocks, always sticks around to power the next big thing. So this repeating cycle gives us a super valuable framework for understanding what's going on right now. There are 4 patterns that we see, pretty much every time a tech bubble pops. Let's walk through each one. First up, like we just said, it's the fundamental building blocks that are left standing. After the speculative gold rush is over, the valuable stuff, the tools, the networks, the platforms, are still there for the serious builders to use. It's like the difference between the frenzy to find gold and the actual mine itself. The mine is what lasts. Okay, the second big warning sign is when the story about the technology becomes more important than the technology itself. When the hype, the grand promises of what it could do, start to completely overshadow what it's actually doing today, that's a huge red flag. You know a correction is probably on the horizon. It's that classic case of the narrative just getting way, way ahead of reality. The third pattern is basically survival of the fittest. When the crash hits, a lot of the weaker companies, the ones built more on hype than a solid business plan, they just disappear. But the big, established players, the ones with deep pockets and a real long-term vision, they swoop in and just pick up all the valuable pieces, the top talent, the best tech, for pennies on the dollar. And finally, even if the buzzword itself gets a bad rap, the underlying technology just keeps on going. The term AI might lose its shiny appeal for a few years, but the core ideas, machine learning, data analysis, automation, they'll just quietly keep spreading, embedding themselves into pretty much everything we do. All right, so let's apply all of this to today. What if we take these historical patterns and lay them over the current AI landscape? What would a burst AI bubble actually look like, say, a couple of years from now, in 2026? This really captures the two sides of the coin. On the one hand, you've got the risks. Funding for those massive speculative AI models would probably dry up overnight. That would lead to layoffs, and a lot of businesses might lose their faith in big AI projects. But on the flip side, you get some really interesting opportunities. The actual building blocks of AI, like GPUs and data centers, would get way cheaper and easier to access. The whole industry would be forced to shift its focus from hype to real, measurable return on investment. And that would open the door for much more sustainable, practical innovation. And that brings us to what comes next. See, a post-hype world wouldn't be the end of AI. In fact, it would be the beginning of something way more focused, more practical, and honestly, probably more important. We'd likely see a huge shift toward what you could call practical automation. So instead of this race to build the biggest kind of godlike general AI, the focus would pivot to smaller, super specialized AI startups that solve one specific nagging problem for businesses. This actually lowers the barrier to entry and drives immediate real-world value. And on a bigger scale, we'd start seeing AI treated as essential, mission-critical infrastructure. I mean, imagine governments investing in AI not for a flashy headline, but to tackle our planet's biggest challenges. We're talking about using AI for way more accurate climate models, for optimizing our power grids to prevent blackouts, and for developing precision agriculture to make sure we can feed everyone. This is where AI stops being a novelty and becomes a necessary tool. Okay, so knowing all this, what's the game plan? What should we actually do? How can we prepare for this potential shift? Whether you're in government, running a company, or you're a creator in the space. This gives us a really clear playbook. For governments, the smart move is to diversify investments and help build open AI infrastructure that everyone can use, not just a few giant companies. For businesses, it's time to get past the flashy demos. The real money is in the boring but profitable AI that actually improves your operations and solves a real customer need. And for all the researchers and creators out there, the message is simple. Anchor your work in real-world value, build deep expertise, and just ignore the hype machine. So at the end of the day, here's the one thing to remember. A burst in the AI bubble shouldn't be seen as the end of the world. Far from it. It would be a necessary correction, a way to clear out all the noise. It would actually mark the beginning of a more mature, more realistic, and ultimately a much more impactful era for artificial intelligence, leaving behind the solid foundations for the next real revolution.